Chances of the DNA matching, and the criteria in forensics is 1 in a billion. They say, okay, if it's 1 in a billion or more, then it's a match. The DNA is that
Sure,
person.
but what's the null hypothesis here?
It's still probabilistic. It's still probabilistic. You can't say because it's probabilistic, it's not a fact. Okay, this is what happens in all of science. So if Suboor's going to reject evolution, he has to reject pretty much all of science.
Wait, hang
so
on.
Hang on, let me finish.
I never said I reject evolution.
Right. You reject human chimp common ancestry.
No, yes, I do.
Right?
But I don't reject evolution. There's a difference.
That's not the point we're debating, Suboor, is it?
No, but you said I reject evolution, which I don't.
Well, you reject human chimp common ancestry. That is the point, right? And you said that there's a problem that it's based on probabilistic
You do understand.
Right?
Wait,
but in science in general, this is what we do. When the Higgs was discovered, they said, okay, we've got 5 sigma certainty. What does that mean? It means that when we collect the data, we say the chances of that data happening by pure chance are 1 in 3.5 million. That's what 5 sigma means. And that in physics is considered a discovery. We've done it, right? We've got enough data. There's all of knowledge, all of human knowledge has uncertainty about it, right? All of human knowledge. So whether it's a philosophical argument, whether it's physical theory, whatever, there's always some certain level of uncertainty. In a criminal trial, you don't ask someone to be proven beyond all doubt, but beyond all reasonable doubt, and they're different.
Sure.
Because they get to a point where the level of uncertainty, whilst not zero, is so low that it'd be completely and utterly unreasonable not to follow through on the evidence that you have. And if you get a probability like something like 1 times 10 to the power 93, the level of uncertainty on that is so low that you call it a fact. That's the right thing to do.
Okay, so wait, one sec. If I make up a hypothesis, which is this, I'm going to walk down that road, and when I'm going to walk down that road, hypothesis that I have is that what's the probability of me being hit by lightning in comparison to another null hypothesis. And the null hypothesis is the hypothesis that as I'm walking down that road, I get mugged by Lady Gaga, then Madonna comes and gives me a punch in the face, and then birds come and pluck at me and they fly away. According to that ridiculous null hypothesis, the probability of me being hit by lightning is very, very high. So what Phil's done here is a very fantastic thing, which is this. He said that this probability is so improbable that this is going to be the result. He didn't tell us the null hypothesis. So I said to him, what's the null hypothesis? He said random. And then I asked him a follow-up question. If two things look similar, why would you assume that when you look at their genetics, there's going to be randomness as a null hypothesis? So those probabilities that he's coming up with are meaningless. 2, when it comes to his earlier point that he made about Elliot Sober is a philosopher of biology, and he admits, like all philosophers of biology admit, and maybe Phil, he's supposed to have some sort of contact with scientists, maybe you can bring to me a philosopher of science or an evolutionary biologist who is willing to say, because he's going to be 1 in a million, who's willing to say scientists don't begin off with the assumption of homology, or that science doesn't begin with a hypothesis, which it actually does. Now, what Phil believes, and this is his deeply held belief, that prior to Darwin, and even up till recently, before we had genetics, all we had was human-chimp similarity, right? Just them looking anatomically similar. Genetics did something amazing. That's what he believes. Now I want to ask Phil.
It's not just genetics, it's also the fossil record as well.
Fine, but we've only spoken about genetics now. Now Phil, I want to ask him in front of everyone. Does he believe genetics changed the conversation on homology?
Well, what I believe is that genetics gave, as the paper in Nature said, spectacular confirmation of human-chimp common ancestry. That's not me speaking, that is the Chimpanzee Genome Consortium speaking. That was
based on the assumption of homology, based on the null hypothesis of randomness.
Okay, what are you talking about?
When you look at similarities...
It's based off of the evidence, that's what you fail to understand.
And evidence...
What Suboor is trying to say is that we start off with an assumption of homology and that's all we got. No.
Yep.
No. What we have is testable hypotheses, falsifiable hypotheses, right? That we then go and collect the data, and then the data will either falsify that assumption or confirm it.
Okay.
And what the data does is spectacularly confirm it.
Like in,
right? Confirm it.
like in human ant similarity, like in human pig
No,
similarity,
not
like in human
because
crow
if you
similarity.
start- let's suppose this. Let's suppose you thought, and I don't agree that humans and ants are the most similar
Sociologically, they
I
are.
don't agree with that, right? But let's suppose
They are.
Let's suppose it's true. Let's suppose it's true. Okay. Then what we can do, we can look for other supporting evidence to see. Is it true that humans and ants share the most recent common ancestor? We can look at other forms of
Using
evidence,
the assumption of
right?
homology.
We can look at other forms of evidence and test it. So we could look at the genetics between humans and ants and see, does it come back confirming that hypothesis or disconfirming it?
Okay.
Right? And what it would do is disconfirm it.
No, it wouldn't.
Right? And also we can look at the fossil evidence.
Okay,
That would
well,
also
let's stick
disconfirm
to
it.
genetics because
And
that's
we
what it's
can
being
look
about.
at
Forget fossil,
biogeography.
we
Why
can deal
should
with
we
all that
do
later. What piece of evidence can challenge the assumption of homology in genetics? I want you to give me any piece of evidence.
Easy.
Go on.
Easy. Right? If the amino acid sequences between species did not follow evolutionary phylogenetic branchings, then that would disprove it.
But hang on, that's assuming that similarities is due to common ancestry.
No, it isn't.
So what's it assuming?
Okay. It's assuming that if there are common ancestry,
Homology.
then
He just says, he says there's no assumption, then he says he assumes.
No, I'm saying, okay, if I misspoke, I'll correct myself, okay? Here is what we do. We look at data and see, can it confirm a particular hypothesis, right? Or is the null hypothesis? I mean, in every case...
And the null hypothesis is randomness.
Right? Yeah, so
which is just as likely as me walking down there and getting punched by Lady
No, it
Gaga and
isn't.
birds coming and
No,
eating me
Suboor.
away.
No, Suboor,
That's
where
random.
you've misunderstood it. That's where you've misunderstood it. Okay? You've completely got things.
What I want
upside
to
down.
know is,
No,
when
Suboor,
you gave us that-
Let me respond. Right?
Sure.
Okay. What you're saying is that if you look at the amino acid sequences, what are you saying? They have to be similar?
No.
Then what?
What
are you
I'm saying
about the
is,
amino
okay,
acid sequences?
let me put up my problem with what you were saying earlier.
Okay.
You were saying, look at this sequence, the chances of this sequence being this similar based on the null hypothesis of randomness is this number, and that number may be 0.0000001%, which is more than the number of atoms in the universe or whatever. What I'm saying is, why didn't you initially point out what the null hypothesis was when you were giving us that piece?
What difference does it make?
What? 1 second, I'm dealing with it. The difference it makes is that you're telling us the entire story. You're not just giving us a part of the story. And then when I asked you, why the hell would someone make an assumption of a null hypothesis being randomness, you haven't given a good enough answer. When we actually have good anecdotal evidence that, if anything, the genetics should be similar because the anatomy is similar.
No, that's completely wrong. You totally misunderstood. It's nothing to do with the similarity in the anatomy. This is the battery. Okay, hang on 1 second. Okay, right, this is what Suboor just fundamentally doesn't understand about this argument, right? It's nothing to do with the anatomy, right? What we've proven is that you can have a completely different amino acid sequence and the same functional protein. This is the whole point. It does not, what he's saying is, oh look, humans and chimps have got similar anatomy, so of course they've got similar amino acid sequences. And that's just wrong.
Why?
Right? I'll tell you why. Because if you take out the amino acid sequence if you take out the protein from, let's say, yeast, right, and put the human protein in there, the function of the cytochrome C is unchanged. So you can have any amino acid sequence you like, right, and you will still have the same functional protein. Therefore, right, it doesn't mean, you can't conclude that the amino acid sequences would be similar based off anatomy. You cannot conclude that. That is false.
No, that's
right?
not true.
It is completely and
No,
utterly
no,
false.
it's not. It's not.
Right?
Okay, so let me explain why you're wrong here. When somebody is making a comparison between two different types of, say, sequences.
Yep.
Now, if two things look similar, then why would somebody make the null hypothesis randomness unless you wanted to reconfirm what you already knew? Now, the issue here is this. Everything we've spoken about so far is based upon genetics. You believe genetics is decisive evidence for human chimpanzee history, yes or no?
Yeah, I believe that, and so do the
Okay.
authors of the chimpanzee sequence paper. Not just me, right?
Sure, fine.
Right. This
Okay,
is what.
okay,
this
fine,
is, this
fine.
is a broad consensus
Fine.
in science. In fact,
One
Suboor,
sec.
let me challenge you. Can you show me any papers in a journal as similarly high impact as Nature that say humans and chimps don't share a common ancestor? Can you quote me even one paper?
I already
that has-
told you, based on the
you
assumption
quote me a
of
paper?
homology,
Can you quote me a paper?
that is a hypothesis. That
Sorry,
is
what
an.
was the paper?
Wait, hang on.
Which paper was it?
Okay, wait. Well, relax. We got time. You know.
I have to go in about 20 minutes from now.
Okay, that's fine. No problem. You've been refuted enough, but I'm going to make one last point. I'm going to make one last
Not been
point.
refuted at all. Zero refutations.
Okay, wait 1 second. Let me refute both of you at the same time because he's been talking a lot. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
All this time he's been speaking about genetics, and I've been bringing him back to the idea of homology, and that genetics adds nothing new to the assumption of homology, and nothing new to the evidence of human chimp ancestry being true literally, because this is a philosophical problem, not a scientific problem which can be resolved by data.
The yeast evidence is clear evidence.
Right? All he's been speaking about is genetics. Now I want to ask him one particular question. Do you think genetics has added anything new to the philosophical paradox of homology and homoplasy?
What I think is that the genetic evidence confirms homologous relationships between humans and chimps.
Okay, let me ask again because he didn't answer. At the time of Erasmus Darwin believed in human primate ancestry based on the assumption of homology. So did John Baptiste Lamarck, so did the ancient Hindu philosophers based on the assumption of homology. Genetics has added nothing new to this conversation. You say rubbish, what do you say?
I would say that it's not what I say. I'm
Your interpretation of what they say.
nobody, okay?
I know that.
Right? Okay, thanks. Okay, who is not nobody is the Chimpanzee Genome Consortium. They are not nobody, they are the top experts in this field, okay? And it's not just one author, this is a consortium of all the leading genomic institutes in the world.
And
what they say is that the genetic evidence spectacularly confirms common ancestry. Right, now you said it's all about genetics,
wait.
so I'm going to give you some fossil evidence.
Wait, one second. No, we're not going to move on from that point.
Why not?
They are saying this is evidence based upon their assumption of homology.
No, it's based
If
upon
the
the
null hypothesis is randomness, like you admitted, which is a self-confirming theory.
It isn't.
Right,
If you
one second.
by definition, if you've got a null hypothesis and a hypothesis, and they're different data,
Null
then
hypothesis
by
is
definition
a-
it's not self-confirming, is it? Because you've got a null hypothesis.
Yeah, but if the null hypothesis
that makes no sense at all,
if
Suboor.
the null hypothesis
That doesn't make any sense at all.
If the null hypothesis is absolutely ridiculous, like me walking down there and getting mugged by Lady Gaga and birds eating
but
away
it
at me,
isn't ridiculous.
anything in comparison is going to be highly likely in probability. Now,
You say it's ridiculous
Now,
because you
what I
don't
want to do-
understand anything at all about
okay,
genetics.
now, here's the thing. All this time, Phil has been bringing up the idea of genetics.
All right,
And-
I'll switch
we-
to fossils.
And we will.
Fine.
I would
Okay, before we go to fossils, let me put the final nail in his coffin.
There's no nail in anybody's coffin except your own, Suboor. Continue.
Okay. Jonathan Marks, who is an atheist, evolutionary biologist. This is his book, What It Means to Be a 98% Chimpanzee. Other species appear to grieve, but none weep as humans do, and certainly not over imaginary events like those in Les Miserables or Love Story. What does genetics have to say about all of this? Nothing, full stop. Sameness, otherness, is a philosophical paradox that is not resolved by argument. That is resolved by argument, not by data. Genetic data tells us precisely what we already knew, that humans are both similar and very different from the great apes. The exact same point I've been making all this time, except I wanted to bring out the quote right at the end when he's dug himself in a very dark, deep place. Genetics adds nothing new to the ancient paradox of similarity and dissimilarity.
Okay, there's nothing in what he quoted, nothing at all, that gives any evidence against human-chimp common ancestry. What that author is saying is that humans and chimps have differences. No one's disputing that. So that is.
Wait, hang on.
That is what we call a
Hang
straw
on,
man.
hang on.
Suboor, I didn't interrupt you there.
I am going to interrupt you because
No,
you have
I
very
didn't
little
interrupt
time and
you.
I want to make sure you refute it well enough.
Yeah, okay.
Wait, one
You are
second.
misquoting. He never
Hang on a
said-
second, hang on a
Okay.
second. We have a good crowd here. How many people think that this guy understood what that quote actually said?
Oh, I thought you said it wasn't decided by popularity vote.
Okay, it's not, but according to your friend it is. So I'm going to go with your
Well,
friend.
he's not my friend. I've never met him before.
Well, he's supporting you. You should be his friend. That means you're... Wait, one second.
You're distracting.
One
This is a pure distraction.
Okay, wait, one second.
We don't decide things.
Wait, one
by
second,
how
one
people
second,
vote
one
here.
second.
Okay.
I gave him a very direct quote, which is, this whole time Phil is speaking about genetics as if genetics has added anything new to the ancient problem of homology and homoplazy, to the ancient paradox. And he dug himself a deep hole by repeatedly speaking about genetics. And in that quote, Jonathan Marks basically says, genetics adds nothing new to this philosophical paradox, which is resolved by argument, not by genetic data. And what does he go on to say? He says, yeah, of course, he's saying we are different to great apes. That's not what the quote says. The problem is this. The quote says this very clearly. And the thing is, Phil comes to the park regularly. I come to the park regularly. We're filming this. The quote, if you want to say I quote mined, no problem. Go and research it and find me how I quote mined it, how I took it out of its context. But very clearly it says this. Homology, homoplazy, the philosophical paradox which existed before Darwin is not resolved by genetics, it's resolved by argument. So genetics adds, according to Jonathan Marks, an atheist evolutionary biologist, nothing new.
Okay, so what he's completely misquoting it, right?
Okay, wait, hang on a second. If I'm misquoting it, what did I quote? One second.
Sorry, can I respond?
Relax.
If you're not going to let me respond,
relax.
we can end this now.
Listen, he's not your friend, but he's defending you a lot.
Sorry, can I respond?
No, 1 second. No,
I
1
can't
second.
respond, I
You
leave.
can respond, but first you said I misquoted him. I'm asking you, what was the quote? Were you even listening?
Yeah, of course, I was listening.
Go on, what's the
what
quote?
What you said was that humans and chimps are different, right? That they have significant dissimilarities. Okay? That's what the quote basically said, right?
Nope.
And that has nothing to do
Nope.
with the question.
Was
in
that
hand.
the quote?
Was that? There was nothing.
That
to
was
do
not
with
the quote.
question in hand. All right.
Okay,
Suboor,
you seem
let
like
me
an
finish.
an objective object over here. So tell us this, was that what I said?
I watched this in the last section because it was too much babble from you. I've stopped listening to you about 2 minutes ago.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Can I?
No, wait,
Suboor,
one second.
Let me finish. If you're going
1 second.
if you're not going to let me finish, I'm going to walk away.
Okay. When someone loses, they want to walk away, so I'm going to let him finish. Go on, talk.
Okay, fine. Right, okay. How similar or dissimilar humans and chimps are is not the question for the debate. So he quotes this guy, Jonathan Marks, right? And he says, oh, humans do this, chimps don't do that. That is completely and utterly irrelevant to the question of whether humans